The northern Maine forest is a place of silence, so deep it feels alive. Pines rise in endless ranks, their dark crowns blotting out the sky. Lakes lie hidden like mirrors, disturbed only by the ripple of a fish or the whisper of a breeze. To some, this wilderness is beauty untouched. To others, it is a place that watches. Ethan Miller saw only beauty at 29. He was a nature photographer whose weekends were devoted to chasing light through landscapes. His camera strap was frayed, his boots worn, his memory cards filled with sunsets that seemed to set entire valleys on fire. Friends teased that he preferred the company of trees to people. He smiled, because it was true. Grace Collins, 26, was his companion on countless trails. She was not a photographer, but she loved the outdoors with the same devotion. Camping had been a part of her life since childhood, and she carried the skills of survival with ease, building fires, tying knots, navigating with the sun. If Ethan framed the wilderness through a lens, Grace lived inside it. Together, they were a pair who belonged on the trail. Their plan was simple: a weekend trip to Blackwater Pond, a remote lake rumored for its glassy surface and sharp reflections of the ridges above. Ethan had been eager to photograph it at dawn, when mist curled off the water like smoke. Grace had agreed instantly. She needed the quiet, the separation from her noisy office job. They told their families they would be gone 2 nights. Grace promised her mother a text once they packed up. Ethan's brother expected a new batch of photos. Neither family worried. Ethan and Grace were careful, well-equipped, and knew the land on Saturday evening. Grace kept her promise. She sent her mother a photo, a low campfire glowing orange. Ethan crouched in the background adjusting his tripod, his outline silhouetted against the lake. The caption read, "Staying one more night by the lake. It's beautiful here. See you Monday." That was the last message either family would ever receive. By Monday afternoon, when the pair failed to return, unease spread quickly. Ethan's brother drove to the trailhead. Their car was there, locked, windshield clear. The interior neat. It looked like it had been parked only hours earlier, but the lot was silent. There was no movement, no sign of return. Rangers were alerted within hours. By nightfall, the first search teams entered the forest. The trail to Blackwater Pond was narrow and winding. 6 miles of dirt and roots hemmed in by walls of spruce. The searchers expected to find the campers delayed, perhaps a twisted ankle or bad weather slowing them. But when they arrived at the lakeshore, their optimism vanished. The campsite stood waiting, untouched, eerie in its perfection. A tent, pitched close to the water, its flaps half open, a cold fire pit, ash scattered in the wind, 2 sleeping bags inside the tent, unzipped as though someone had stepped out only moments earlier. A flashlight rested on a log. Grace's jacket hung neatly from a branch. Food remained in a cooler, unopened. Ethan's tripod stood near the water's edge. Camera missing. Everything was in place, except Ethan and Grace. Rangers widened their circle. The soil near the camp should have shown footprints. Instead, it was undisturbed, as if the two had stepped out of existence. The shoreline revealed nothing. No tracks, no drag marks, no sign of struggle. Dogs were brought in. They circled the camp, sniffing eagerly, then whined and stopped. Scent trails evaporating in the trees. Helicopters swept the lake with searchlights, their beams slicing through mist. The water glowed silver but revealed nothing for days. The search expanded. Volunteers joined, combing ravines and ridges, voices echoing Ethan's and Grace's names into the silence. Rangers rappelled down cliffs, trudged through bogs, and scanned caves long abandoned. Each night, they returned empty-handed, faces lined with fatigue and disbelief. Families gathered at the trailhead. Grace's mother clutched her daughter's last text, reading it over and over as if repetition might conjure her voice. Ethan's brother paced the dirt lot, demanding answers, refusing to leave. Rangers could only shake their heads. By the 5th day, tension sharpened. There should be tracks, one searcher muttered. There should be something. Yet the forest gave nothing back. The camp stood as it had on the first night, belongings intact, Fire pit cold on the seventh day. Storms rolled in. Rain pounded the soil, washing away whatever faint traces might have lingered. Search dogs lost any remaining scent. Helicopters grounded. The forest, already silent, seemed to close in tighter by the 10th day. The official search ended. Rangers recorded their report. 2 campers, Ethan Miller and Grace Collins, presumed missing in the area surrounding Blackwater Pond. No evidence of foul play at this time. But reports cannot explain absence. They cannot soothe families staring into the void of unanswered questions. Grace's father stood at the edge of the lake on the final evening of the search, staring at the tent. "It looks like they'll step out any second," he whispered. But no one did. Rumors began to grow even before the teams left. Some said the pair had drowned, though the lake yielded no bodies. Others claimed they had been attacked by animals, though no blood or torn clothing was found. A few whispered darker possibilities, that the woods had taken them, as it had others before for Ethan's brother and Grace's parents. Explanations meant little. What mattered was that 2 lives had vanished, leaving only a campsite that looked like a photograph frozen in time. The searchers walked away. The family stayed, and the forest kept its silence as winter came and snow buried the campsite. One line appeared again and again in conversations, in whispers, in the pages of local papers. It was as though the forest itself had swallowed them whole. The search for Ethan Miller and Grace Collins ended on the 10th day, but for their families, the silence had only begun at first. There was noise, endless phone calls, media interviews, vigils. The story of 2 young campers vanishing without a trace spread far beyond Maine. Newspapers called them the missing couple of Blackwater Pond. Television anchors framed the forest as a place of mystery and menace. Reporters swarmed the trailhead, broadcasting from the same gravel lot where the car still sat, headlights occasionally flickering as if waiting for its owners to return. But attention, like fire, burns fast and dies quickly by winter. When snow buried the trails, the cameras were gone. Search teams moved on to other cases. The news cycle shifted. What remained were 2 families staring into a void where answers should have been. Grace's parents refused to surrender. Each year on the anniversary of her disappearance, they drove to the trailhead with candles and framed photos. The first vigil was crowded. Nearly 100 people gathered, their flames glowing against the trees, songs echoing into the night. The second year, fewer came. By the third, barely 24 stood in silence, their breaths misting in the cold. By the 5th, it was only Grace's parents and Ethan's brother, Daniel, standing in the dark with candles that flickered in the wind. Daniel fought the silence differently. He built a website, 1 page at first, then dozens. He posted timelines, maps, and theories. He uploaded every photo Ethan had taken on their previous trips, hoping someone might recognize a detail. Someone knows something. The homepage read. For months, he updated daily, then weekly, then whenever there was a glimmer of news. As the years stretched, the updates grew sparse. But the site never went dark. The community itself grew divided. Some believed Ethan and Grace had simply gotten lost, victims of the unpredictable storms that sweep northern Maine. Perhaps they slipped into a ravine or drowned in the lake's dark waters. Their bodies never recovered. Others whispered darker theories, that the missing memory card from Ethan's camera meant someone had been there, someone who had taken more than just photographs. Rumors hardened into legend. Blackwater Pond was no longer just a lake. It was a story. Parents warned children to stay away from it, calling it cursed. Hunters claimed their dogs refused to approach its banks, whining and turning back. Campers swore they heard voices at night near the waterline. Some said the voices called names online. The case thrived. On true crime forums, strangers constructed elaborate theories. Some argued the pair had stumbled on a cult hiding in the woods, perhaps descended from hermits who had lived off the land for generations. Others pointed to a string of unsolved vanishings across the region, linking them with red lines on digital maps. A few claimed the campers had staged their disappearance, Choosing to start over somewhere new, Daniel read them all. At first, he fought, correcting details, arguing with strangers who speculated carelessly about his brother. But as the years passed, he stopped. The forums became background noise. Chatter that neither helped nor healed. The silence wore down the families. Grace's parents began to fracture beneath the weight of absence. Her mother clung to the hope that Grace was alive somewhere, perhaps held against her will. Her father, weary and pragmatic, believed otherwise. Their arguments grew bitter, long silences filling the spaces where laughter once lived. Daniel isolated himself. Consumed by his crusade, friends drifted away. Employers lost patience with his absences. His life narrowed to a single obsession, the belief that Ethan had left clues no one else had found. He spent nights poring over topographic maps, circling areas that search teams had missed. Each season, he returned to the woods, trudging miles alone, eyes scanning for scraps of fabric, metal, bone. He always came back empty-handed. But he never stopped, and the forest gave nothing back. 5 years passed. Seasons turned. The campsite decayed, its tent collapsing into the soil, its fire pit overgrown with moss. The trees grew thicker, as if determined to erase every trace of the two who had once slept beneath them. Blackwater Pond remained still, a mirror reflecting clouds and sky. Silent as ever, the silence was total, unbroken until one autumn morning, deep in those same woods, a hunter stumbled upon something strange. Following deer tracks through undergrowth no trail touched, he pushed aside branches heavy with moss and found a shelter of rotting logs. Inside, bones lay scattered among leaves and ash. Some were animal, some were not. 5 years of silence shattered in an instant. The forest had given something back, and what it revealed was darker than anyone had prepared for. The man who broke the silence was not searching for answers. He was searching for deer. Robert Hale was a seasoned hunter, 58 years old, with decades of experience tracking game through the thick woods of northern Maine. On an October morning, just after dawn, he followed a trail of hoofprints into country few dared to enter. His boots sank into moss, and his breath hung in the cold air. The deeper he went, the quieter it became, until even birdsong faded, leaving only the sound of his own footsteps. Hale had hunted these forests for years, but he rarely pushed this far east. The terrain was rough, tangled with undergrowth and hidden bogs, and most hunters preferred the easier ridges. Yet that morning, something about the tracks compelled him forward. 2 hours into his trek, he saw it. Through a wall of spruce, hidden beneath vines and branches, stood what looked like a forgotten campsite. The sight stopped him cold. A torn backpack lay half buried in leaves, its fabric faded and split at the seams. Hale bent, brushing dirt away with a gloved hand. Inside was a wallet. When he opened it, a damp ID card slid free. The name on it made his stomach tighten. Ethan Miller. For a long moment, Hale just stared. He knew the story. Everyone in Maine did. The missing campers, the mystery of Blackwater Pond. 5 years had passed, but their names were still spoken in hushed tones around firelight. And now, here, in his hands, was proof they had once stood where he stood, heart pounding. He looked around. More objects appeared as his eyes adjusted. A rusted camping stove, its metal corroded, a dented water bottle with initials carved crudely into the side. GC, Grace Collins. Hale backed up, his instincts telling him to leave. But something else caught his eye. 10 feet beyond the stove was a crude shelter, built from branches and bark. Its roof collapsed inward. The wood was blackened by weather, moss crawling up its sides. Hale hesitated, then pushed the branches aside. Inside, beneath a scatter of leaves and dirt, were bones. At first, he thought they were animal remains, deer, perhaps, dragged inside long ago. But as he stepped closer, he saw shapes that did not belong. A femur too straight, ribs too narrow, fragments that bore the unmistakable curvature of human form. Mixed together, tangled in ash and soil, were the remains of more than one kind of life. The air inside the shelter felt suffocating. Hale stumbled back, hand trembling as he pulled his phone from his jacket. His call to the sheriff's office was short, his voice taut. "I found something, Gear," and Bones dash. Within hours, the site swarmed with rangers, deputies, and forensic teams. Yellow tape stretched between trees, radios crackled, cameras flashed. What had begun as a hunter's morning trek became the center of a reopened case. The backpack was cataloged first. Inside, along with Ethan's ID, were torn scraps of clothing and a notebook ruined by rain. The water bottle with Grace's initials was logged next, photographed carefully, each item confirmed beyond doubt. The campsite belonged to Ethan and Grace, but the shelter was the focus. Investigators crouched inside, pulling fragments carefully from the soil. They placed each bone in evidence bags, labeling them, whispering quietly to one another. Some were clearly animal: deer, raccoon, rabbit, but others were not so easily dismissed. By nightfall, news had already spread. Reporters camped at the trailhead, microphones thrust at rangers who refused to answer questions. Families were notified. Daniel Miller sat in silence, staring at the phone as though it had betrayed him. Grace's parents wept, clutching each other's hands, their faces pale with the weight of confirmation. Yet confirmation was not closure. The items proved Ethan and Grace had survived beyond the campsite at Blackwater Pond. They had built shelter, left gear, perhaps endured for days or weeks longer than anyone had believed. But the bones inside the shelter carried a darker implication. Forensic teams worked through the night. By morning, one fact was clear. Among the animal remains were fragments consistent with human bone. No one wanted to say it aloud, but the truth pressed in from every side. The silence of 5 years had broken at last, not with answers, but with questions more disturbing than ever before. And as Daniel Miller stood outside the cordoned site, watching investigators carry out evidence bags under tarps, he whispered the thought none of them wanted to voice. The forest didn't just take them, it did something worse. The official statement was careful, cautious, clinical. Items linked to the missing campers, Ethan Miller and Grace Collins, were recovered in a remote area. Remains are under forensic review. Investigation ongoing. But for those who had seen inside the shelter, the words meant little. They knew what they had seen. Bones where bones should not have been, and yet the bones told a story no one wanted to believe. The evidence from the shelter was sent to Augusta within hours, sealed in dozens of bags and containers. For weeks, the families waited, knowing the results would either confirm their worst fears or deepen the mystery that had already consumed 5 years of their lives. When the report came back, it did both. Forensic analysts confirmed that some of the remains were human. The DNA matched Ethan Miller, but the fragments were incomplete. The skeleton far from whole. His skull was missing. Portions of his arms and legs were absent. Even more disturbing were the marks found on the bones themselves. They were not consistent with animal predation. The cuts were straight, deliberate, as if made with a blade. Some bore signs of burning, charred black as though placed in fire. One specialist hesitated before giving her statement, but when pressed, she admitted the truth. These are not random. They were done by someone with intent. Grace's remains were not among those recovered. Not a single fragment matched her DNA. For her parents, that absence was both hope and torment. Was she still alive somewhere, having endured the wilderness for years? Or had her body simply never been found? The hunter who had stumbled upon the shelter returned to speak with investigators. His account added another layer of unease as he described the site. He swore he had seen strange carvings on nearby trees, symbols etched into the bark, weathered but visible, circles intersected by lines, crude stick figures, spirals that seemed to twist endlessly inward. He thought little of them at the time, assuming they were old markings by bored hikers. But after what he found in the shelter, the memory gnawed at him. When investigators returned to the area, they confirmed his description. The carvings were real, scattered across half a dozen trees, each symbol slightly different, each one fresh enough to suggest they were not 5 years old, but recent. And then there were the signs of habitation not far from the shelter. Rangers found a ring of stones blackened by fire, primitive tools, a shard of flint, a length of rope twisted from bark. Animal skins stiff with age lay tucked under a crude lean-to. More disturbing were the traps, snare lines set between trees. Small pits dug into the soil, all designed to catch game. Whoever had been there knew how to survive, and they had been doing it for a long time. The question that now hung over the investigation was not just what happened to Ethan and Grace, but who else had been there with them. As analysts combed through the items, they discovered something the hunter had missed. Inside the torn backpack, stuck between ruined pages of a notebook, was a fragment of paper. The writing was smudged, rain-warped, but legible in parts. The words had been scrawled in Ethan's handwriting. "They're watching at night." The line ended in a smear, as if the pen had been dragged across the page in haste. The fragment was enough to ignite the case like dry tinder. Theories multiplied overnight. If Ethan had written those words, then he and Grace had not been alone. Someone had watched them. Someone had been near their camp long before the final night. Daniel Miller, Ethan's brother, held the fragment like it was holy scripture. He saw them, he said to reporters, whoever they were. He knew Dash. Grace's parents clung to the same words, twisting them into fragile hope. If Ethan was writing, her mother insisted, then Grace was alive with him. She could still be alive, Dash, but hope could not erase the evidence. Ethan's bones, altered and burned, told a story of violence investigators hesitated to go on record. No arrests were made, no suspects named. The official phrasing remained clinical. Human remains confirmed. Cause of death undetermined. Further investigation ongoing. Dash. Yet behind closed doors, the whispers spread. The search teams had seen too much. The traps, the fire rings, the symbols on the trees. These were not the signs of hikers. These were signs of people living in the forest. People who had remained hidden for years. Some rangers believed the pair had stumbled upon them by accident. Perhaps Ethan's camera had captured something it shouldn't. Perhaps the missing memory card held images someone wanted erased. Others believed the truth was older, stranger. That Ethan and Grace had crossed paths not with squatters, but with descendants of those who had vanished into the wilderness long ago. People who had built their lives in shadows, who viewed outsiders as intruders. The theories divided investigators as much as they divided the community. Meanwhile, Daniel returned to the forest alone. Despite warnings, he carried his brother's journal fragment in his pocket, reading it aloud as he walked the trails. They're watching at night. He camped near the lake, staring into the trees, waiting for movement. He claimed to hear footsteps circling his tent in the darkness, though no one else was there by the time winter fell again. The case had grown heavier than ever. The discovery of bones had not closed it. The journal fragment had not answered it. Instead, the mystery had deepened, drawing everyone toward a single, dreadful question. Had Ethan and Grace encountered someone in the forest that night? Or had they stumbled into something far older, something that had always been there, watching? The discovery of Ethan's remains and the fragment of his writing did not bring the closure the families had waited for. Instead, it splintered them further apart. Daniel Miller, Ethan's brother, became relentless. To him, the evidence was undeniable. Ethan had been watched, hunted, and killed. This wasn't an accident, he told anyone who would listen. Someone out there did this to him. And they're still out there. Dash. He petitioned authorities, wrote letters to state officials, even hired private investigators, who retraced every step of the search. His website shifted from hope to fury, its pages filled with maps, theories, and pleas for recognition of foul play. Grace's parents, however, could not let go of the one absence in the evidence. Her body. To them, the lack of remains meant possibility. Her mother clung to the hope that Grace had survived. Perhaps taken, perhaps hidden. If she isn't here, she told reporters, then she's somewhere else. Alive. Dash. Her father tried to temper her belief, but even he admitted the uncertainty left room for doubt. The difference in their views gnawed at their marriage, pulling them in opposite directions, one chasing hope, the other bracing for grief. The community, once galvanized by the mystery, began to recoil. Locals avoided the trails around Blackwater Pond. Hunters changed routes, muttering that the woods no longer felt safe. Stories spread of strange encounters. One man swore he heard voices whispering his name from the trees at night. Another claimed he saw fires burning deep in the forest, flickering for hours before vanishing without a trace. Few dared to confirm such tales publicly, but in small-town diners and bars, the whispers grew online. The case spiraled into legend, forums filled with theories, some rooted in logic, others stretching into the bizarre. A hidden cult, descendants of hermits who had lived off the land for generations. Wild men, untamed survivors of past centuries, protecting their territory with violence. Supernatural explanations emerged too. Watchers in the forest, entities older than memory. The story of Ethan and Grace became fuel for endless speculation, their names entangled with folklore for authorities, though the case had become a burden, with no arrests, no suspects, and no new evidence. The official line grew colder. After months of silence, a short statement was released. The case of Ethan Miller and Grace Collins remains unsolved. No further leads are being pursued at this time. Unsolved, a word that felt like betrayal to the families. As if the investigation itself had given up, Daniel refused to stop. He returned to the forest year after year, hiking deeper than the rangers had, leaving markers, setting trail cameras. He swore he once captured the outline of a figure in the distance. Too tall, too broad to be a trick of light. But the image was too grainy to prove anything. Still, he carried it like evidence, showing anyone willing to look. Grace's parents continued their vigils, though fewer and fewer joined. They stood by the trailhead each September, lighting candles that sputtered against the wind, whispering prayers into the silence. "If she can hear us," her mother said once, voice breaking, "we want her to know we never stopped calling." And then came the final twist, a year after the campsite discovery. Another hunter entered the forest, drawn by stories he didn't believe. In a clearing not far from the ravine, he found a tree scarred with carvings. At first glance, it seemed like another set of crude symbols, the kind already tied to the case. But then he noticed something different. The letters were clear. G.C. Grace Collins. Beneath the initials was a date. The numbers were shaky but legible. 2018, 2 years after she had vanished. The carving reignited everything. If Grace had carved those letters, then she had been alive long after the world had given up on her. Alive, and perhaps still trying to leave her mark, to remind anyone who came after that she was there for Daniel. It was vindication. She was out there, he insisted. Maybe she still is. Maybe whoever watched Ethan kept her. For Grace's parents, it was a spark of hope that cut like a knife. If she had lived 2 years longer, why hadn't she come home? Who had stopped her? The carving was logged, photographed, filed away. The authorities, careful and exhausted, declined to speculate. No conclusive link. The statement read, but everyone who saw the photographs knew the truth. Grace had been alive longer than anyone believed. The legacy of Ethan and Grace's disappearance became something larger than the tragedy itself. Blackwater Pond grew infamous. A place where hikers spoke in hushed voices and few stayed after dark. Online, their story became a cautionary tale, a symbol of how wilderness swallows lives and leaves only fragments behind. Yet for the families, there was no closure. Daniel still demands foul play be recognized. Grace's mother still believes her daughter is alive somewhere, and the forest, as always, remains silent. But silence is not empty even now. Hunters whisper of voices. Campers report fires that vanish when approached. Some swear they feel eyes on them when they walk the trail. And at the tree where Grace carved her initials, moss grows over the letters, but they can still be seen, faint and defiant. The story ends not with answers, but with unease, because the forest does not simply erase. It remembers, because sometimes the forest does not just keep secrets, keeps people.